Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Demco Base Plate on a 2022 Ford F-150. There's going to be 5 main components required when flat towing a vehicle, and the first is going to be the base plate, and that's going to be the structural support that's on the frame of the vehicle, and that's going to allow you to hook up your tow bar, and that's going to be the connecting point between the hitch on the RV and the base plate. That way you can safely tow it down the road. And just like a trailer, you're also going to have safety cables, and that way in case of a disconnect, they're going to keep everything nice and attached, and that's going to attach to the hitch as well as the base plate. Now also, diode wiring is going to be important. It's going to transmit the light signals from the RV to the taillights on the towed vehicle. We also have a braking system, and today we have the Air Force One because we have air brakes on our coach, so that's what this cable is for. But with every braking system, there's going to be a breakaway cable, and that way, in case of a catastrophic disconnect, it's going to pull this cable, bringing the vehicle to a stop. That way it's not rolling down the highway. The base plate is going to be a requirement when it comes to flat towing your vehicle, and this becomes the structural mounting point for your tow bar, as well as your safety chain loops, and many times also the rest of your components. Now this one's a pretty easy one because it just simply replaces where the tow hooks are, so it maintains a nice clean look. There's no real trimming required to get this installed, and when going down the road normally just driving, you can remove these arms to give you a pretty clean look overall. There's also caps that are included with this to keep any dust, dirt, and grime buildup from the front, and that's going to help prevent any corrosion long term. Now, it also, as I mentioned, has your safety chain loops right here, so that's going to be another one of those components that you'll be hooking up. And it does come with a bracket that allows you to get your 6-pole as well as breakaway switch, and in our case, our air fitting. I wasn't able to find a really great spot to get that to mount up. This is kind of a tricky one as far as getting those components mounted, but overall the base plate's actually very easy to get installed, and you can knock this out fairly easily. Now, a few things that are going to be important when choosing a tow bar is also considering if you need a high-low adapter. So when you flat tow your vehicle, you want that tow bar to be nice and level. So on our vehicle today, from the ground to the center of our pins here, it's going to be 16 inches. So you're going to want to measure the hitch on your RV and then determine whether or not you need to get a high-low adapter. And generally the rule of thumb is going to be 3 inches plus or minus this measurement. Anything more than that, it starts to put the tow bar at an angle that's really not safe to be towing down the road and hitting brakes. Now, this is going to work well with the Demco Excalibur that we have here, but if you have a different tow bar, not to worry. You can pick up ends that are specific to go to this Demco base plate. So if you're getting a Roadmaster or a Blue Ox, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure you pick that up with the Demco ends. That way you can get this properly hooked up. So pretty easy here. You'll just slide this in place. You'll then get your safety chains hooked up. Now we'll also get our 6-pole hooked up for our diode wiring. Get our breakaway switch attached to the hitch on the RV. And in our case, if you have air brakes and you're using a fixed system, we're going to have this coiled air cable that's going to go to our air fitting. Now when it comes to getting your vehicle flat tow set up, there's going to be some installation that's going to be required. And if it's something that's maybe beyond your scope after watching our installation videos, maybe you don't have the space to do it or the tools to do it or even the want to do it, you can use our dealer network here at eTrailer, and that way you can find someone close to home that can do the installation for you. But for those of you that are DIYers and maybe a little bit handy and want to do this yourself, follow along and I'll walk you through how to get yours installed. For the installation of our base plate, they're going to live where our tow hooks are at currently, so obviously we're going to need to get these removed. And on some of the F-150s, they'll have this cover that slides around them. It's pretty tight in here, so we'll try to get this pried out. And a lot of times your best bet is if you get a flathead screwdriver and just kind of wedge it. It's fairly flexible. You can see there's like a little rubberization at the back end. But a lot of times if we can kind of pull this around where the loop is, there's kind of a spot where it catches. So it's kind of tricky here, but we'll just kind of reach back here and then pop this out. We'll kind of work at this here. Now, these are in there pretty good. There's no clips or anything holding them in. It's just there's some flaps that really just do a good job of making sure these don't come out very easily. I think the best bet, though, is if you work on the side with that flathead screwdriver and really try to get this flap out and then just kind of work your way towards the bottom as you go. And once we kind of get this portion out, you can then pull the bottom and then just kind of take this lip, put that over the tow hook, and then it kind of pulls down from there. And then once this is removed, you can just do the same thing on the other side. Now we're going to remove the front bolt. It's going to be a 15mm socket to accomplish that. And we are going to be reusing these, so hold tight to these. We're going to completely remove them, and we're going to eventually loosen up the back ones here, but for now we'll just take these front ones off. And if they do fight you, don't be surprised. There's factory thread lock. You can kind of see the blue on there, and sometimes they can get a little bit tight, but it should come out once you kind of knock it loose. The back bolts we're not going to completely remove. We're going to loosen them up. You'll see that this is slotted, and so is our base plate that we'll be putting up. So with a 15mm ratcheting wrench, I'm going from the back side or underneath here, and I'm going to go ahead and get this loosened up enough to where we can slide out our tow hooks. With that loosening up, we should be able to slide this back and we can remove these. You can hold on to these if you want. They're not going to be going back on the truck, so you can keep them if you ever want to revert back to stock. Before we put our arm receivers in place, what we're going to want to do is get some thread lock on this back bolt. And this is attached to a nut plate that sits in the frame rail, and these attach to it. So while this is attached, I can rotate this back and forth, and that's going to be the threads for our bolts. So to get this one out, to get some thread lock on there, I'm just going to put this in place for now. And then we'll get this taken off of that 15mm, and that way we can get thread lock ready to go. So once we take this out, we'll just go ahead, we'll grab our Loctite and coat up these threads here. And then we're just going to put this back in place. And again, if it's not lining up, you can use this bolt to kind of rotate it. I'm just going to hand thread this in. Once it gets tight, we can stop there. We'll then take out our front one, and if you still have your thread lock, you can go ahead and put this on the threads. We're not going to thread this in quite yet, but we'll have it ready to go because we can grab our arms. And this is just going to slide. You can see this keyhole here. We're going to feed it over that, and then this will slide in, and then we can bolt it up with that bolt. Now, something I'll point out, depending on your truck, I'm not sure which trims require it, but there is a spacer that is included here that just will sandwich on the top here and give us a little bit more clearance. But on ours, ours is going to sit nice and clean here, flush with the opening of the bumper, so I don't think we need to use that. If your truck, if this is going to sit up high and there's going to be some issues, that's where you're going to put this in place. But what we'll do, we'll slide this in. You may have to push that bolt up here. And once that drops in the keyhole, we'll just slide this forward, and that's going to make it open to where we can get this in place. You may have to, again, rotate that nut plate to thread this in, but we'll get this started. Now before we snug everything up, you're going to want to check your truck to see if there's going to be an opening that aligns perfectly with this back mounting hole that's on our arm. And ours lines up perfectly. These are in place, and as I reach up here, it's a perfect spot to be able to get our hardware that we're going to pass up there. If you don't have that spot, what you're going to want to do is raise this up in place in line with those bolts. You can tighten them down if you need to hold it. And we're going to do a 1/2 inch hole, so you'll just drill that out, making sure that you can pass your hardware through. Now, also in the instructions, they have you take this bolt down. There's this charge piping support, and this is to gain access to this access hole, because what we're going to do is put this block that's threaded, and this will pass up through the arm, and then we'll tighten it down. But since ours has that hole already there, I don't think we need to do any of that. So if yours lines up, you'll just follow the same steps that I'm doing, and if you need to drill, just go ahead and do that. So the bolt we'll be using is included with the base plate, so we'll put a split washer, a flat washer, and then we're going to go ahead and put some thread lock on here. So we'll take our block and we're just going to slide this up and get those threads to align. So if you need to, you may grab like a flathead screwdriver, a magnet or something to move that along until we can get this to thread in place. You may have to kind of play around with it a little bit for this to thread in. And then once you kind of get that started, we'll just kind of keep this in place here, and we're going to go ahead and start getting these tightened down. We need to attach our safety chain loop attachment here. So we're going to grab our safety cables that's going to become a structural point to where we can bolt this up, wrap it around the frame, and that way if this was to ever fail, all that hardware was to fail, it's still going to stay attached to the truck. So we'll grab these two, as well as 2 of the long bolts, 2 of the spacers, and then 2 of the nylon lock nuts. And our bracket's going to go in place on the inside. So what we'll do first, we'll be putting that safety chain loop on the back one. So what we'll do is drop the bolt through here, and this is going to pass through this section here, but we need to put our spacer in place. So it's going to get a little tight here, but have your nylon lock nut ready as well. And what we'll do is slide this here, and I'm going to go from the inside out here. And so it's a little tight. Just slide your bolt back. There's a gap that you can pass it through. And once you get just a little bit of thread started there, grab your spacer block or your spacer tube here, and we'll just pass that through. And then put our nylon lock nut in place, just hand thread it on. And then on the back side, it's going to be the same, but when we put our spacer tube in place, we're also going to put that safety chain wrapped through there. So a little different, but essentially the same process. And I think it's easier to wrap that around and kind of raise this up at one point. And then pass this through and get our other nylon lock nut in place. At this point, we have everything pretty well in place. We just need to snug it up before coming back with our torque wrench. So our 15 millimeter is going to get those factory bolts in place. Now you don't have to get crazy here, so if you're using an impact, take it easy, because that torque wrench is going to get that last little bit of tightening down. We just want to make sure that we save ourselves a little bit of rotation here. Now as far as clearance here, it can get a little bit tight, so a deep well with an extension got that front one pretty easily. If you just grab a standard shorter socket of the 15 and kind of peel this back, you should be able to get to it. You may have to resort to using a ratcheting wrench to kind of snug this down. It's just a little bit tight here, but we'll get this snugged down as well. And then our back bolt, our new hardware, is going to be a 3/4 inch socket to accomplish that. So I'll get that one tightened while we're here. You may need to use a ratcheting wrench here to kind of get that drawn up. That's going to give you more clearance for that short socket to get in place if you are using power tools. Now for our safety chain loop attachment here, it's going to be a 3/4 inch socket and wrench to accomplish this. So go ahead, get this snug down. Now we'll just repeat the same process on the other side of the truck. Now coming back with our torque wrench, we're going to want to make sure we check the chart for the hardware to make sure we get the proper torque setting and dial in accordingly. Now on those two factory bolts, there's really no torque setting associated with those. I just snugged them down to where I felt I was pretty confident that it's pretty tight. So about what I took it off with force-wise, I try to match that. The other ones, the hardware is going to be the same size from these to the back bolt as far as diameter goes. So those are going to stay with the same torque setting. So we'll go through, get this torque down properly. And this is going to make sure that long term we're going to have it tight enough to be able to tow our vehicle down the road, but also not too tight, putting stress on any of the hardware. So if you need a torque wrench, you can get one here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free, but this is going to be an important step. And our side bolts that hold in the safety chain loops, those are also going to need to be torqued, but make sure you have a wrench on there. That way it's not spinning on you. For attaching our safety cables, we're going to grab our quick link, and I recommend hooking it onto this portion first. It's a little bit tight here, so maybe in hindsight probably should have done this first. But once we get this attached, we're just going to wrap it around the frame rail and then attach it back to the quick link. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is just a added precaution. Not that I ever think any of this hardware would fail, but if this was all to rip out, it's still going to be attached to the frame of the vehicle. That way it's not rolling down the highway without any attachment. So I'm going to wrap this over, making sure that I don't go on any lines that we may have. And then once we loop that around, we'll just tighten this up. You can put a little thread lock there if you want. And this is going to be, kind of loose here. So if you want to, you can zip tie this up just to kind of keep that rattling down to a minimum. So with the safety cables in place, we've officially installed our base plate on our F-150. Now at this point, you're just going to need to get the rest of your flat toe components set up. And unfortunately on trucks, it does get a little bit tricky as far as mounting them up. So you may have to get a little bit crafty. We've used these sections here for our umbilicals and any air fittings, anything like that. So they do include this bracket. If I can find a good spot, I'll definitely use it. So I'm going to get all my flat toe components set up. I'll show you what I kind of came up with as far as getting it mounted up here. But it's really nice. There's no trimming involved right now. And that's something you don't see in a lot of base plates. So with this being done, we'll come back later. I'll have everything put together, and then we'll take a look at it. Now we've gone ahead and got our whole kit installed, and I'll kind of walk you through where everything ended up going and how it's connected. So up front, I mentioned that this is a little bit more difficult as far as getting everything mounted up, just because a lot of times trucks just don't have a lot of great structural places to put this. But what I ended up doing is using self-tapping screws for my air fitting. I did build a bracket for our breakaway switch and just self-tap that up into the metal here, and that tab just puts it further back. So if you weren't to add your own bracket or do a little bit of fabricating, it's just going to stick out a little bit. You might be able to get crafty and find another way. And that was a look and installation of the Demco base plate on a 2022 Ford F-150.